The 13th reason why Justin, the long-haired Mac Daddy Trudeau, should not be re-elected by the people of Canada. 13. He disrespected Alberta on Canada Day 2017. Violently and viciously disrespected Alberta. And he's been disrespecting Alberta ever since he was Prime Minister. I told you about the oil sands thing, but even little tiny passive-aggressive ways, he mentioned all the provinces. Y'all remember that? He mentioned all the provinces in his speech. Ontario, Newfoundland, Quebec, PEI, all this, and then he forgot Alberta. Do y'all remember that? That was a famous thing. I mean, he did that deliberately. And the reason I can say he did that deliberately is because of the way he talks about Alberta. Even before he was Prime Minister, he had said he thought Quebecers were better than Albertans. There's a famous video with him with that stupid, I think that's a fake beard he had at the time. And he said, oh, you know, all the greatest prime ministers came from Quebec, and look at what we have. We have this Albertan, and he's just tearing up the place. I mean, that's how he speaks of Alberta. Talking about getting rid of the oil sands of Alberta, which is the bedrock of Alberta, the oil sands. You get rid of that, you get rid of the province forever. They're all going to starve. It's done. I mean, he hates Alberta. For him to hate a very significant part of this country, especially a part of this country which feeds, I would say, feeds the rest of the country. I mean, Alberta rakes in billions of dollars through its fossil fuels and natural resources, and then dishes it out in transfer payments and equalization payments. And for you to disrespect that province, such an important province, you don't deserve to be Prime Minister. 14th reason, gave $10.5 million to terrorist Omar Khadr. This is a terrorist who killed 2 American soldiers. Our neighbor to the south killed 2 American soldiers, somehow made his way to Canada, and gets $10.5 million. So, I mean, the best way to get rich in Canada, the easiest way to get rich in Canada is to commit murder, and come to Canada and say, well, when the Americans had me in Guantanamo Bay, they poured a little water on me and all kind of stuff like that. So, you know, can I get $10 million now? I mean, you're lucky. If it was me, I'd have chopped your toenails off. 15, I mean, spent $5 billion in 2016 on other nations while cutting benefits to veterans. I'm going to get more into that much later down the list. I'm going to get more specific. 16, refused to aid the world in the destruction of ISIS. To this day, Canada is not participating with America and France and the rest of the great powers to crush and destroy ISIS. And that's one of the first things he did as Prime Minister. He said, oh, we're not going to fight ISIS. And we're going to talk about that even more. 17, lost Canada's respect around the world. When every time the Mac Daddy goes to G20 meetings and summits all over the world, and you've seen videos, and I've shown videos, the people, the world community, they treat him with such disrespect. When he was in Italy at one of the G20 summits that they had, Donald Trump was there, Theresa May was there, Angela Merkel was there, everybody was there, and they were all talking, and all the leaders, they were speaking, and Trudeau was just standing out there. He wasn't even, they were all, it was like a circle, like a mosh pit, and they were discussing whatever they were discussing, and he was out of the mosh pit. He was just standing there, staring at them, looking at them, peering at them, you know, trying to get into the conversation. It's almost like they made a deliberate effort to shun our so-called Prime Minister out of any talks or discussions, even if it was a talk about grandkids and American football. I mean, the way they treat this guy shows that the world does not respect Canada. If you can do that to the leader of this country, if you can actually do that to the leader, shun him and put a bubble around him deliberately and so methodically. And I showed you the video. That shows that the world doesn't respect Canada. And even the way Donald Trump talks about Trudeau, I mean, he talks about like to everybody, but he doesn't respect the man. He doesn't. He wouldn't have done that with Harper. They would not have done that. Many people found Harper annoying or a little pushy or a little ambitious, but they respected him. They respected him. He created M103, number 18. M103, which was a motion geared towards stamping out Islamophobia. Now, I was very critical of M103, very critical, because I said, how can you even have a motion which tries to stamp out fear of a religion? You got people around the world who fear Christianity, Judaism, or who at least criticize it. And some people, many people, and I'm going to talk about it in a few seconds actually, have been mildly critical of Islam and have gotten into deep trouble in this country. Now, that leads me to number 19. He lied to Canadians when he said M103 was only a motion. It's not just a motion. That's the law of the land. Ask Kevin J. Johnson. You know how many times they've locked him up? That's when I met Kevin, when I made a video about him being locked up for criticizing Islam. And he's been locked up several times over this M103, this criticism of Islam. I mean, more than once, more than twice. I think he's been locked up 5 times now over this thing. And then he got into a spat with a lawyer, and then he got locked up for things like that and all kind of stuff. I mean, but the thing is that the freedom of speech, the freedom to question, the freedom to be critical of religion is gone in Canada, because you can get locked up, and it's not like you're saying death to Islam. I've never heard Kevin talk like that, or anybody of any importance talk like that. I mean, nobody, but people who have been critical and seriously critical of a religion with Sharia law, all sorts of stuff, have actually been put in jail. And the long-haired Mac Daddy said that this was only a motion. Well, it's not a motion, it's law. And which now, number 20. Canadians pay more on taxes than anything else. Now, this may not have started with Justin Trudeau, the long-haired Mac Daddy, son of Satan, but it sure has been amplified under him. He has added the carbon tax. He has added the GST on the carbon tax. He has added many different taxes and expenditures that Canadians now have to pay and are forced to pay. And this is Canadians who already pay more on taxes. Middle-class Canadians. He said he was going to be the middle-class prime minister. But they're paying more on taxes than they do on anything else. Groceries, car insurance, education. It is this. What kind of I mean, you said you were elected to be the middle-class prime minister, but you're just milking the middle class and you're leaving them out to dry in the hot sun. 21. Raised taxes on small businesses and farmers, and yet couldn't answer whether or not he paid his fair share on his trust fund. I made a video about this a few years ago, talking about how there were questions that Justin the Long-haired Mac Daddy Trudeau, the son of Satan, was not paying his fair share, tax deductibles, offshore islands, and yet he's billing Canadians and small business owners and middle-class people through high heaven and up and around. And it's not like he's using that money for Canadians. I mean, as I said, he's giving billions to other countries. Look it up. Snubbed the people of British Columbia during wildfires ravaged by the province. Now, this was back when British Columbia was going through some very tough times, weather-wise. The province was being burned to the ground. The whole west coast, the prairies was being burned down. Alberta was being burnt down. It looked like hell. You driving through Alberta, it looked like hell. And where the Mac Daddy he just snubbed them because he doesn't like the West, he doesn't like the prairies. Even joking about Star Wars, talking about may the Force be with you, when that Star Wars movie was coming out, when people were burning like hellfire out there in the West. I mean, for you to just snub a large portion of this province, of this country, automatically disqualifies you in my books. And I'd say the same thing even as a conservative and you treated Quebec that way. I'd say you're disqualified. You cannot hate a large portion of this country and then run for prime minister. That's hatred. He let Energy East pipeline die. He let that die. All those jobs out there in the West, let that die, but now he buys Trans Mountain and he's doing nothing with it. It's another hatred of the West. Said veterans ask for too much. Y'all remember that? Gave $119 million in aid to Middle Eastern and African nations for their food crisis while cutting services for type 1 diabetics by taking away their tax credits. Story I talked about a few years ago. Tax money saved from employee discounts. That's another thing I made a video about a few years ago. He actually, and it's going on even today, taxing the money that employees save when they get discounts at their job. It's like it's taxed. It's taxed. I mean, you say you're supposed to be the middle class prime minister, the working man's prime minister. You're anything but. You're a globalist. $5.6 million on a skating rink in front of the House of Parliament when Rideau Canal was next door. Another waste of money. Another waste of money. Unnecessary waste of money. You had a perfectly beautiful canal which was frozen over in winter, one of the coldest winters ever. I was there. Kevin J. Johnson and I was there. We were freezing out there, and I can guarantee you that canal was frozen. But $5.6 million on a skating rink. Built a road for Jordan, another waste of money, helping other countries instead of your own country. Globalist. Illegal aliens and refugees in Canada get sports stadiums and free hotels as shelters, and homeless Canadians were freezing to death left, right, and center. This was the last winter, and apparently this winter is going to be even worse. And I've heard now that refugees are getting an extension when it comes to staying in hotels in the greater Toronto area. They're getting an extension. So what about the Canadians who probably never left their city, never mind left the country, who are freezing to death like flies out there in the middle of Toronto, Montreal, Calgary? It was happening. Well, I'm in the greater Toronto area, so I can speak for Toronto. I don't know what happened out in Calgary and Montreal, but in Toronto, many homeless people were dying, frozen to death. They just found them on the side of the road, like as if this is some third world country. Canada projecting deficits until 2040 and $1 trillion in debt by 2035 if we keep going down the Trudeau path. This is just facts, pure mathematics, calculation, arithmetic, which many of the great media moguls of the day have discovered and have come up with, and many of the institutes of the day have unearthed that this is what will happen to Canada if we continue down this reckless, long-haired Mac Daddy, son of Satan, hating Canada path. Has taken several, and I actually just thought of a new one. So there's now, instead of 38, there's 39. It's taken several private days, several special days, personal days, especially during times when there's been terrorism, weather-related crises, economic crises. The Mac Daddy, with his lazy self, just taking vacation after vacation after vacation after vacation. It's almost like he doesn't want to be prime minister. So let's take him out of his misery. Took the special pay Canadian veterans received if injured, and if they don't go back to work within 180 days, would get their pay cut. That's another thing he did to veterans, and veterans are asking for too much.